Hello, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about how to get user input through forms and more a little bit about passing down functions. We're going to continue from the previous checkpoint, which was on creating lists with components. So if you don't have the code for that, check the notes. We've got a code checkpoint for you, but I'm excited to get started. So Twitter is cool, but I think the important part of Twitter is being able to create new tweets, right? So let's learn how to do that today. If you think about it, right, we need to have some sort of input box where the user can input what tweets they want to add, right? And then once they hit some button, it should add it to a list. So the first thing we're actually going to do before we even create this input box is make this list modifiable, right? If you think about it, this is a great candidate for states. Why is that? Because this entire app needs to keep track of which tweets to render. So we're going to do that with a super quick refactor here. Again, we're going to use our friend the state hook. Here, we're just going to do the normal stuff. And interestingly, right, what we can do is not only pass in a number to useState, but even an array, right, which is what we're doing here. So we're going to say the default is going to be default tweets. Once we save, nothing should change as expected because we didn't actually change anything. But now we're kind of ready to create our own input box. I think the input box is its own component. So let's make a new file. I'm going to call this component compose tweet. It's kind of up to you. You can call it whatever you want. And first, as I typically do, before we actually write any of the logic, all I want to do is kind of just template it out a little bit, right? So this is what we want it to look like. And like we did with this tweet component, we're going to import it and then have it render in our app. So we're just going to do that. And then, I don't know, just pop it over here. So without any of the functionality, our app is kind of going to look like this. We can type in something here and create the tweet. Well, I think we should write a new function, right? Functions are super cool. So we can create a new function called create tweet. And here, for now, let's just say we need to get just what the text of the new tweet is going to be. So what are we going to do? Well, this is a bit more complicated than it might seem like it is. We're going to do three things. We're going to first make a new copy of our array. So what this function does, this is called spreading, just takes the tweets thing and then makes a deep copy of it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Just make sure you do this every time. Then we're going to add a new item to our new tweets thing. And we can do this with push, which is a function in JavaScript. And here we just need to have an object that fits what we want. We'll get to editing the author later. For now, we can just call this you, for example. And for the body, we're going to use in the parameter that we pass, which is called new tweet text. So let's do that. Last but not least, we need to update our tweets array. So we'll do set tweets, and we'll call it with this new tweets situation. So yeah, that works out pretty well in my opinion. But if we save this, right, hitting this create button is not going to do anything. And the reason why is because we don't call this function anywhere. How are we going to do that? Well, the create button doesn't actually live in our app component. It lives in compose tweet. So what we should probably do is pass it to compose tweet. Yeah, so what we can actually do, not only passing strings and numbers to components, we can also pass functions, right? And this is really a really important part of JavaScript and React. You can treat functions like most other variables. So we're going to pass down this function to our friend compose tweet over here. Now let's switch gears to compose tweet. Since we are going to use props, we're going to make sure that we use that there. And as we did in the previous time when we made like button, we're going to use the onClick property of button. Wait a second though, right? We can't just type in add tweet here or create tweet because we don't know what the text is in the input box. And to do that, we can once again use our friend state. So first, we're going to again import this use state hook from React. And then we need to actually kind of do two separate things. First, we need to somehow get the value of this input. Then we need to figure out what to do with this create button. So first, let's do this value stuff. We're going to create a new state variable called text, and we're going to have the set text, this kind of thing. The default value for this thing should probably just be the empty string. Then I'm going to make this function called handle input. Handle input is something that every time this input thing gets changed, right? We type in something here, we want to update the state. If you're not familiar, this E thing right here is usually shorthand for an event. And in HTML and in React, you can get the value of a certain event. In this case, the event is a keystroke, something changing the input using target.value. This is kind of a little bit of a swipe under the rug, if you will. So input, similar to button, has this thing called onChange. And onChange, we can pass in a function. This function will get called every single time the input changes, right? So are we done? Not exactly. We want to treat state as this like single source of truth. So whatever the state is, that's the correct answer. So we need to also tell the input what the correct answer should be. So we can do that with a prop called value, and the value of the prop is going to be text, right? So I'm going to write this other function called composeTweet. And what composeTweet does is two things, right? First, we call createTweet that we got from app.js. And now we can actually pass in the value of this input box. The second thing we're going to do is reset the input box, right? It'd be kind of weird if after you hit submit, the text was still kind of there. And then we can now pass in this function to composeTweet over here. Ta-da. So once we do our little refresh, we can just type in something here. So if I want to say, you know, Lil Nas X should perform at Queer Hacks, I can hit create, and we get this tweet kind of up here. I can hit the likes button, things like that. So that was a lot of stuff that we kind of dropped at once. And I also want to point out again, you might ask, wow, this seems like a lot of work to get an input to work. But this entire thing, which is called the controlled form input, right? The state is controlling the input's value and it's onChange. Again, makes it really easy for us to create very complex apps. Imagine if, for example, you had to work on Facebook's Messenger platform, where there's tons of different messenger chats happening at the same time. As a quick recap, what we covered today, we made a new component, composeTweet. We talked about how to do a controlled form input, right? So it's two-way. We both have an onChange listener that updates the state, and we set the value of the input through the state. We did this on click. This is nothing too exciting. And from our top level, we also learned that one, we can create a state that's based on an array. There's no problem with that at all. And we talked about this little micro function. We talked about the spread operator, pushing stuff to an array, things like that. And finally, we talked about passing functions as props to other components. So yeah, the last kind of common React pattern series we're going to cover is conditional rendering, and we're going to figure out how to get the author to show up as well. And then we'll almost be done. So super exciting. I'll catch you in the next video.